Eric Duhaime, who has been on the show and here on CJAD on numerous occasions, has got a brand new book out. In fact, it launched last night. He is, of course, leader of the Provincial Conservative Party. The book is called Destination Autonomie, but it's going to be in English as well, as I understand. Eric Duhaime is on the line. Mr. Duhaime, thanks so much for coming on.
Always a pleasure.
So I have a couple of questions because I read the sort of press release here, and I want to read what it says. You unveiled your vision for a more autonomous Quebec to fight what you call, and I'm quoting, toxic federalism from Ottawa, positioning it as a third way between the status quo and sovereignty. So I have a couple of questions in there because when I read the words toxic federalism and autonomy, how is this any different than the way the CAQ positioned itself?
Well, there's a lot of differences. I mean, because the CAQ has been saying that they wanted to reform all sorts of things, but they never did alliances with their partners and allies in English Canada. As a conservative, as you know, there's many provinces that think the exact same thing as Quebecers, and we need to build bridges with those people. That's why next week I'm going to travel to Alberta, Saskatchewan, BC, Ontario, meet conservative leaders and some of our premiers to make sure that we build bridges, we build alliances. And, the thing is that the centralist vision of the Liberals in Ottawa is feeding the separatist movement. And now it's not just in Quebec anymore, it's also in Alberta. The separatist movement in Alberta is now almost as strong as in Quebec for obviously different reasons, but still, the roots is because everyone across Canada is getting more and more fed up about a government that doesn't respect its own jurisdiction, that violates the constitution of this country,
Okay, hold on a sec. With all due respect, the numbers that favor separation and separatism or sovereignty, whatever you want to call it, are almost at historic lows. That's what poll after poll after poll shows us in Quebec.
Yeah,
so why do you say that it's not?
Well, 30%. No, I'm saying in Alberta it's as high as it's never been. Here in Quebec, it's still 30%. I mean, it's and among francophones, it's much higher. I mean, it's not something that we want to keep going. What we need is to respect the constitution of this country. Historically, the fathers of this country, the fathers of Confederation, decided that there were two governments, one provincial, one federal, that they were both sovereign in their own jurisdiction without interfering in each other's business. And what we saw over the last few years, is more and more a government, the federal government, that think they can dominate the provinces. And that doesn't work.
I'm trying to understand because it seems to me you also call for single tax returns. You want to eliminate the federal tax return. Does that also mean we're prepared to give up the transfer payments and money we get from the other provinces and from the federal government as part of this?
Well, personally, I want to make sure in Quebec we exploit our oil and gas and we become much wealthier. And yes, we stop receiving transfer payments. I hope the day that Quebec is going to be strong enough and we're going to stop receiving transfer payments. That's an objective that I'm working with on the economic side. But and for the tax return, we just want to do the same thing as the PST and the GST, where it's already done. There's already only one perceptor, and they're transferring the money to the federal level.
Is your suggestion that by going ahead and drilling for oil and having exploration and that as part of a business in Quebec, something that of course I think last time I checked on a poll on this, most Quebecers did not necessarily agree with that idea. Would that offset all the money we receive otherwise?
Well, it depends how strongly we're ready to go on that side. But, we need to build a better economy in Quebec. I agree with you. It's not acceptable that we get more and more transfer payments every single year, that we become more and more dependent. Because the matter of dependence and independence is, first and foremost, it's not the referendum on sovereignty. It's to make sure that we're able to pay for our own bills. And that's something that I think Quebecers should work much stronger to depend less on government and more on their own creation.
Yeah, I think that sounds great ideologically, but the reality is we live in a probably more uncertain time now than we have in quite some time. That money is there as a buffer. If we don't have that money and you wait to develop an oil industry, something that would take years, that's a long time to wait without getting the money that we're getting now. How do we even get by without that money?
Well, of course, there could be a transition period. I'm not saying that it's going to happen overnight, but still we have to, at least we need to make sure that we have a goal and we're moving towards it. Right now, we're not. I mean, Quebec has a huge reserve of natural gas, and fortunately, as you know, the new premier, Madame Christine Fréchette, opened the door on that front during the leadership campaign that just ended with the CAQ. So we might have an ally now with the premier, and that's something I'm looking forward to see, and we're ready to collaborate as conservatives with the government to make sure that Quebecers finally exploit their natural gas reserve.
I asked you before about, the difference between you and the CAQ. You just brought up Christine Frechette basically as an ally here. If people are going to look at this, and obviously just in the week or so that she's been the premier, poll numbers have, gone up for the CAQ, for her specifically. Why would they vote for you and not for her?
Well, I mean, because they've been in government, it's not just a matter, of autonomy. There's a lot of things that are not working properly in Quebec right now. That they've piled up the worst deficit in our history. They lost their credit. How do you say it? The credit rating in New York. The healthcare system has been worse than ever. We think it's time to add the private sector and have some competition to make sure that everyone has access to healthcare services and so on. I mean, the CAQ does not have a vision, and the problem is that we don't know what the CAQ stands for now that Mr. Legault is not there. And unfortunately, yesterday, even with the shuffle, all the most important and prominent ministers are still back exactly in the same portfolio, so I don't see a real big change out there.
Maybe my question to you should have been, how are you different? With the exception of you saying, and I believe you're still saying this, you would not hold a referendum. You don't want sovereignty, right? Not. Okay. What's the difference then, if you factor that out, and maybe that's an unfair question, between you and, say, the PQ and Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon?
Well, my model is not the PQ. My model is what's going on in Alberta right now. I see a provincial government that is taking care of its own business, and they were able to adopt a law on their own autonomy. The same thing with Saskatchewan first, and they won a few battles with the federal government to make sure that they could, have their control over their own natural resources. They were able, it's something that's very unique that very little people noticed in Quebec. But then the premier of Alberta was able to sign a deal with the Canadian government that went against the government's policy during the campaign, and they had one minister, Stephen Guilbeault, who had to resign out of it. It's very unusual that we see a province that has so much power and so much strength, and that's what Quebecers need. I mean, when we arrive to negotiate with Ottawa, we don't have any strength.
It seems to me, as you describe it, Eric, it's this government under Mark Carney being much more open to dealing with provincial governments, right? That's what this deal with Alberta signifies. I'm just wondering, you're dealing with a politician now in Mark Carney who's the most popular politician, not in Canada, in Quebec. And you want to sort of go up against that?
Well, I want to have the same deal as Alberta's doing. How come they can sign deals with the federal government that we can't? We're stuck. And that's what I want. I want to make sure that, we have a government in Quebec City that is fulfilling our dream of having more autonomy within the Canadian Confederation. Because the more, we have to stop that. What I'm concerned about, honestly, is that right now, if you look at the polls, we have two parties that are leading, that they want both go in a referendum campaign, one in the yes bus and the other one in the no bus. And Quebecers don't want any bus to go anywhere. And that's my main concern right now. We want to make sure that we conducted a poll lately asking them, do you like the status quo? Do you like independence? Or you want Quebec within Canada with more autonomy? Huge, strong majority, over 40-something% was in favor of autonomy, and it was 15% independence and 20% the status quo. If we need to unite Quebecers and stop fighting between yes and no. Nobody wants to have another referendum here except a few political leaders. Okay.
I got to leave it at that. I'm sorry. I'm up against news. I hope we can talk again soon. I very much appreciate your time, Eric. Thanks so much.
I'm Luke Wilson. Join me each week for Film Never Lies. Since retiring from the NFL, I've had a lot on my mind, and now I've got my own show. So if you're tired of lazy takes, if you want honest conversations, join us each week. Film Never Lies, available on all TSN platforms and the iHeartRadio app.